I began to think about what we need as a woman in the church and really what I myself need to grow in, there was only one thing that really stuck in my mind, and it's about relationship. So you see, when we got baptized, we were called to baptize our schedules, our wallets, our lifestyles, our wardrobe, but we're also called to baptize our relationships, which is, not that easy to make. You need to really make an effort, you need to forge it, and it really needs to be intentional. Although we all came from the world, we cannot bring worldly relationships into God's kingdom. What I think we need most right now in the Denver church is godly relationships. So, this is actually my title for tonight, Godly Relationships. So, we are going to look at 3 different types of relationships and 3 different friendships that will teach us how to have a godly relationships. Okay, point number 1, peer relationships. The first friendship we will examine tonight is probably one of the most famous stories in the Bible. It is David and Jonathan's friendship. However, before we see this great example of their relationship, I want to contrast it by looking at Saul's response to David's success. So let's go to 1 Samuel chapter 18. Okay, in 1 Samuel chapter 18, in verse 1, in verse 7, it says, "As they danced, they sang, 'Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands.' Saul was very angry. This refrain displeased him greatly. 'They have credited David with tens of thousands,' he thought, 'but me with only thousands? What more can he get but the kingdom?'" Right here, Saul did not really like the praises from the people for David's success. He was very angry. And Saul did not have a right or close relationship with the Lord. All he had to affirm his heart was the praise of man. And so when David was more praised, it really bothered Saul. This one reason is actually the reason why Saul was a bad leader. He resented and felt threatened by his subordinates' success. I've been studying the word insecurity because it has been really coming into my life. And I've noticed that when you are insecure, it always connected to people-pleasing, selfishness, jealousy, and competitiveness. And when you do those things, you actually lose the favor of those closest to you. And you can see that in the Bible. You see, because of Saul, jealousy and competitiveness, insecurity, he actually lost his daughter Michal and his son Jonathan. But more importantly is actually he lost the favor of God. This is also one of the most obvious and sinful signs of a weak leader. So now let's compare that with Jonathan's response. Let's go to chapter 18, verse 1. And it says, "After David had finished talking with Saul, Jonathan became one in spirit with David, and he loved him as himself. From that day, Saul kept David with him and did not let him return home to his family. And Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. Jonathan took off the robe he was wearing and gave it to David, along with his tunic and even his sword, his bow, and his belt." It's amazing that despite having more to lose, Jonathan admired David while Saul hated him. After all, Saul was already a king. And David's rise to fame would prevent Jonathan from ever becoming a king. And yet Saul hated David and Jonathan loved him. The question I had to ask myself is why? And I think it is pretty simple. Jonathan and David were unified in desire to see Israel succeed. And therefore, they appreciated one another's accomplishments. The unified cause allowed them to have a deep and loyal friendship. And it often highlighted as an example of covenantal love, loyalty, and sacrifice between two people. This is how peer relationships should be in the kingdom of God. Two people unified in their desire to see the world one are not competing with one another, but together competing against Satan. We also need to develop covenants between us. So, what was the meaning of covenant back then? And how is it lived out between these two peers? Well, their covenant, as detailed in the Old Testament, it signified a deep, unwavering friendship and a mutual commitment to protect each other's well being and families even after death. This covenant was not just simple agreement, but a deep personal and binding pact of loyalty for which they are both willing to die. So, how important was their covenant? Their covenant shows unshakably loyalty between two individuals, even if it cost them everything. This covenant was not just friendship, it involved binding promises that shaped their lives and their decisions. Right here, Jonathan made a covenant with David, giving him his robe, his tunic, his armor, sword, bow, and belt. And this act represented that Jonathan recognizing David's future kingship, even though he was the heir to Saul's throne himself. Can you imagine that? You are the next line of kingship, but you're already praising someone and accepting that that person is going to be the king instead of you. And we see right here that Jonathan also stayed loyal amid danger in the next chapter. And Saul became jealous of David and sought to kill him over and over again. And yet Jonathan protected David by warning him of Saul's plans despite risking his own life. They reaffirmed their covenant, promising loyalty and kindness, not only to each other, but also to each other's descendants forever. You know, in 1 Samuel 20, you don't have to go there, you see that they wept together when parting, with David weeping the more. Let's look at Jonathan's sacrifices. Well, Jonathan put his own life at risk by defending David to Saul, his own father. And his loyalty to David, even over his father's wishes and his personal ambition, shows his righteousness and selflessness. And many forget that Jonathan was also a warrior who in 1 Samuel 14 initiated a one-man war against the Philistines. Actually, he has his armor bearer, but he's so bold that he can defeat an army of Philistines. And this made Jonathan more than a prince. He was the heir to the throne. And everyone believed that Jonathan would be the next king of Israel. Undoubtedly, Jonathan had the most to fear from David's success. And yet he loved David because he loved Israel and he loved Jehovah God, who was bigger than any difference they may have had. Therefore, he only cared about accomplishing God's will and not by whose hands it would be accomplished. He could see that God's hand on David. He knew David's destiny and was willing to set aside his ambition to honor the Lord's choice. David couldn't wear Saul's armor, but David did receive Jonathan's armor. It was not because they have the same size, but because they shared the same soul. They both loved God and put him first. You know, Jonathan also knew that if the circumstances were reversed, David would do the same thing for him because their soul were knitted together. You know, they could never have had this kind of close love and friendship if they cared more about their roles than their goal. They loved each other more than the throne of Israel because they loved the Lord and more than the throne of Israel. You know, sadly, some people have suggested that David and Jonathan had a homosexual relationship. It's crazy, right? They suppose that two men cannot love each other without it being something the Bible clearly says immoral. But the relationship between David and Jonathan was not homosexual. Instead, it showed what godly peer relationship should look like. You know, we can only have a relationship like this when we crucify our own desires and rid ourselves of selfish ambition and insecurity. You know, there were so many reasons why the relationship should never have worked. And yet it did, because it was centered on God. You know, most of my life I've lived in the Philippines. And so moving in America was definitely challenging and very difficult for me. I became a wife. I became right away a mom of three. And I became a leading women's ministry in Hawaii with different culture, different language, and then suddenly COVID hits. And it's really, really tough time for me. But God used that time in my life to have a Jonathan and David relationship with my best friend, Raina Kelly. We've been together in Hawaii and then in SF, and then she got pregnant, so she needs to stay over there. Couldn't bring a pregnant woman everywhere, you know? Back then, I was just starting in leadership. I don't have any experience. I only led, I think, Bible talk. And then suddenly, boom, leading a church. Like, I don't know what's going on. And she was more mature than me, physically and spiritually, and yet I had to disciple her. You know, during that challenging time in my life, she gave me her whole heart, her loyalty. She loved me and she supported me. She believed that I would do great things for God. And she always the one who cheered me on. You know, we did a lot of things in Hawaii. Oh man, don't get me started. We did a lot. You know, I think it's been we stayed over there for 2.5 years. We scheduled our grocery together. We shared our faith together. We confessed vulnerably together, and we cried together and laughed together. So we're a little bit crazy. We do karaoke together. We preach together, and then so much more. And you know, actually, our husband, we always like drop our. Reina always drop her husband to our house, and then we just go for the whole day and spend time and do things. And they even call us salt and pepper because it's very hard to separate, and we're always together. You know, she was always happy with my success and my accomplishments, especially when I got appointed as a women's ministry leader. She was one of the first person who really congratulated me and really sent me a long message of appreciation. And I have never felt any competitiveness from her. Now we have our babies. You know, it's really amazing because I got pregnant, and then I think 2 months after she got pregnant with her little boy as well. And then I just like noticed that like because Shan's second name, or you guys call it middle name, is Benjamin, and then her son's second name is Joseph. Said, oh my gosh, did you? We never talk about it, but you know, Joseph and Benjamin is the son of Jacob with Rachel, right? And anyways, I just want to add that it's kind of cool. We didn't talk about it, but although we're far from each other now, I'm happy to say that her good news is still my good news. And my good news is still her good news. So my question, sisters, are your peer relationships godly? Can you say that they are centered around a unity of purpose? Or are your peer relationships centered around worldly and ungodly similarities, like gossiping and being sin buddies, which helps steer both parties further away from God? So tonight, ladies, I want to challenge you to develop a godly peer relationship. Point number 2, discipling relationship. You know, the second relationship we will examine is that of Ruth and Naomi. I know you guys love Ruth and Naomi. I love that story. Okay, let's turn to the book of Ruth, and in chapter 1, and verse 3, it says, now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other Ruth. After they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and Naomi was left without her 2 sons and her husband. Let's jump to verse 8. Then Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show you kindness as you have shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband. Then she kissed them goodbye, and they wept aloud, and said to her, we will go back with you to your people. But Naomi said, return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and then gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grow up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters, it is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has turned against me. At this day, at this, they wept aloud again. Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. Look, said Naomi, your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her. But Ruth replied, don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even that separates you and me. When Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. So the two women went on until they came to Bethlehem. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the woman exclaimed, can this be Naomi? Don't call me Naomi, she told them. Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me. So Naomi returned from Moab, accompanied by Ruth, the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, arriving to Bethlehem as the barley harvest was beginning. You know, to kind of understand, Ruth right here was a Moabite woman who was a descendant of Lot's incestuous relationship with his oldest daughter in Genesis 19. And amazingly, despite this fact, she was one of the 5 women mentioned in Jesus' genealogy. And you know, this is amazing because God can make even the ugliest things become beautiful again. And Ruth is actually the only Old Testament book in the Bible that actually named in Gentile name. So Ruth means a compassionate friend. So Ruth grew up as a pagan who worshipped idols and Gentile gods. And amazingly, her mother-in-law, Naomi, taught her about God and helped her to become a Jew in behavior. Okay, in their relationship, we learn our need for a Naomi and to be a Naomi. We need to be taught about God by someone older and wiser than us. And we need to teach those younger than us about God. We also learn how to be truly loyal from Ruth. The word loyalty means unswerving allegiance, being firm and steady, and having a strong resistance to deserting or betraying someone. So Ruth was the first loyal to God, but then to the mentor God had put in her life. So what was the situation? So right here, Ruth was barren for 10 years. She didn't have children. Her husband died, her father-in-law died, and now she and her mother-in-law had nothing. They were both heartbroken, and Naomi was bitter. Sadly, when we are bitter, we hurt the people around us and often hurt ourselves. If you notice, I don't know if you notice in the scripture that we read, Naomi sent her other daughter-in-law, Orpah, to go back to her own people and her own God. She sent her to die spiritually even though she knows the truth that there is only one God. You know, in this story, Naomi encourages Ruth to abandon her, but amazingly, she did not. Despite having nothing to get from Naomi, all of her sons died, Ruth refuses to leave her mother-in-law and vows her loyalty to their relationship. We see how amazing Ruth is. She stayed with Naomi, who had become a bitter person. And we all know that bitter people can be nasty and hard to get along with. And you know, Naomi wanted Ruth to focus on her needs. But Ruth could only think about her needs after her mother-in-law was cared for. Naomi thought that Ruth needed someone to redeem her. And Ruth knew that Naomi needed someone to love her. In this story, Ruth becomes known for her loyalty, respect, trust, diligence, and kindness. And amazingly, her attitude and love for her mother-in-law eventually healed them both. Naomi says, it says that, okay, don't call me Naomi, call me Mara, which means bitterness. And you know, one thing is amazing is Ruth accepted who Naomi was and decided to love her despite her shortcomings. You know, sisters, great discipling relationship begins with respect. And at the same time, right here, Ruth was blessed by Naomi's wisdom as she helped her to find a husband again. You know, older women are mature Christians. As we age, we pass on what God has done for us. And Jesus instilled this teaching in his disciples as well. We all need a spiritual women to teach us how to live for God. And at the same time, Naomi respected Ruth as well. You know, great discipling relationships are built on mutual respect. At first, Naomi sent her daughter in law home. I think maybe because Naomi felt too tired to continue caring or teaching and training young women, given that she is grieving the loss of her husband and now her two sons. It's understandable. However, she eventually puts Ruth's wishes and needs above hers as she sees her need for guidance. And as I mentioned, she eventually helped Ruth find another husband. What helped Naomi get over her pain was that she stopped looking at her situation and stopped focusing on her pain and got focused on the needs of others. She stopped thinking what is best for Naomi and instead she focused on helping Ruth. So the challenge, sister, is first, if we are discipling someone, we need to respect them. We need to value what they think, what they feel, and what they want. You know, when we value others, we become more than a teacher. We become a mentor who cares about the outcome of another's life. It says that in Philippians 2. You know, mutual respect is a key ingredient in every good discipling relationship. It produces sincere affection and loyalty that lasts a lifetime. Number 2, if someone is mentoring us, we need to be loyal to them. We also need to take the initiative to learn from them and practice what they teach. And we see this with Ruth as she took the initiative to work in the fields to provide for Naomi while listening to her wise counsel. So what was the result of Ruth's decisions? Well, you can see. Her life was blessed. She married a wonderful man named Boaz, who became his protector and redeemer. And not only that, they had a son. And she became the great grandmother of David and ended up in the lineage of Jesus Christ. So what can we learn from these two women? Well, first, we should always remain open to giving and receiving discipling. Number 2, godly discipling relationships can never be limited because of age. Number 3, anyone can be a mentor or a mentee on some level. Older women are not the only ones qualified to mentor others. Number 4, great discipling relationships make each other better. We can see it in Ruth and Naomi. They made each other better and they healed each other. So, I just want to share about my friendship with our amazing sister Sandra. Before, she is Lopez, but now she's Foxworthy. I don't know really. I never heard her name. I don't know her really well. And I just know that she's going to be with us in the North region in LA. But I think the first time we met was in Lake Tahoe. Lake Tahoe, it's a Cubs retreat. I think Rachel was there too, right? But one thing is really amazing is like the very first time she met me, she's like asked me like, "What do you need? I'm here to support you." She really have given her whole heart to me. Like she's very loyal. She wanted to support me. She accepted me, and she was so respectful. There is a saying that respect is earned, not given. But Sandra totally went against that. I didn't do anything to earn her respect, and yet he has given it to me wholeheartedly. Though there is a truth to the saying, but I believe the reason it was easy for her to do it is because she focuses on God and what she can offer and give to other people. It has been a joy to work with Sandra. Who don't love Sandra? Sandra is amazing. If I can keep her forever, I will keep her forever. But she is married now, so she needs to submit to her husband. But, yeah, it's sad. But, I'm just so grateful for you, Sandra. Thank you so much for always giving your heart. I know I have a lot of flaws. I have a lot of shortcomings, but you really embodied the soul or the spirit of Ruth. And I just really love you. Thank you for being my friend. So tonight, sisters, I have a few questions for you to ask yourselves. Do you have a discipler? I hope yes, because we're in a discipling church, right? So if you have a discipler, what qualities are you hoping to learn from your discipler? Are you discipling someone? If so, what are you trying to teach them? Do you have a dream for them? Do you have a plan for them? Like when you have a child, you need to think about them. You need to have a plan for them, and you need to think about their future. Do you respect others as much as you want to be respected? Is your loyalty based on a mutual respect for God and their role in your life? Do you take the initiative to meet with your discipler? Do you care for them as well? Do you check on them as well? Or do you wait for them to come to you and get disappointed if they don't reach out to you? Do you follow advice wholeheartedly? And do you give advice lovingly? Here are a few convictions that I have come to adopt. First, God brings people into our lives for a reason. Take a look at the women around you and take advantage of opportunities to learn and give to them. Secondly, I must always embrace the people God has given me with respect, loyalty, diligence, and kindness. Number 3, my discipling relationships are a precious gift from God. Number 4, don't waste a discipling relationship. Let God use it to bless you, to shape you, and to fully use you for your purpose. Point number 3, relationship with God. Finally, I wanted to look at the greatest relationship in the Bible. And this isn't discipling relationship. Although it involved discipling, it is certainly isn't a pure relationship, but it is the relationship between God and His Son. Please turn your Bible to Hebrews chapter 5. In verse 7 it says, "During the days of Jesus' life on earth, He offered up prayers and petitions with fervent cries and tears to the one who could save Him from death. And He was heard because of His reverent submission. Son though He was, He learned obedience from what He suffered. And once made perfect, He became the source of eternal salvation for all who obey Him, and was designated by God to be a high priest in the order of Melchizedek." Right here, Jesus teaches us how to have a relationship with God. And remember, God was His Father. But God is also our Father. And we are His daughters. To serve God in a way that makes Him feel loved, we need to have a proper view of God. Many of us romanticize our relationship with God. And I have often heard women refer to God as their husbands. And I have probably even said something like that myself. But although there were ways that God is like a husband, He is not our husband. The Bible describes Himself as a father, your father and my father. So why is this important? Well, if God is our Father, then He is in a position of authority and is someone whom we must respect, revere, and obey. One of the challenges we have is that some of us treats God the same way we treat our fathers. We also assume that God is like our Father. If you were spoiled, chances are you treat God in a similar way. If you were abused, you assume that God doesn't have your best in mind. It is important to remember that God is our Father, but He is not like our fathers. And we need to treat Him like Jesus did and not like we treated our fathers. The Bible says that during Jesus' life on earth, He became known for His loud cries, which were heard because of His reverent submission. And this means that there were times that Jesus Christ did not want to do what His Father told Him to do. That's why He was crying. We all experience that. When you don't want to do something, you're just like, ah. Right? Sometimes we complain, like we just whisper and huff and buffing. But anyways, there were times that Jesus didn't feel close to God. Times that He was tired, afraid, hungry, and etc. But one of our struggles as a woman is that we romanticize our relationship with God so much that we assume we are supposed to always feel close. We are supposed to always feel good about everything we are asked to do. And yet Jesus gives us the perfect example of a submissive son who lived for his Father's will regardless of how he felt. He understood that his job wasn't to change God's command, but rather to change his heart through prayer and to embrace God's commands. I hope that we can all say tonight that we see God as our perfect Father, who we love and we are striving to obey. In conclusion, I want to share in Ecclesiastes chapter 4, in verse 12, I'm going to read the message translation. It says, by yourself, you're unprotected. With a friend, you can face the worst. Can you round up a third? A three-stranded rope isn't easily snapped. According to this passage, God did not create us to be alone. Actually, here in high school, there's a saying that no man is an island. So we cannot really be alone. So Jesus wanted us to have relationships like David and Jonathan, Ruth and Naomi, and most of all, a relationship with Him like Jesus did. As we close out tonight, I want to ask you yourself a few questions. Well, I want you to ask, do I have a godly relationships? Are my relationships centered around obedience to God's will? Sisters, I want to challenge you. We need to go after friendship. We need to take initiative and create a tighter sisterhood in Denver Church. Yeah. The question is, are we willing to do what needs to be done to have these types of relationships? Are we willing to be hurt and to forgive? Are we willing to be selfless in our friendships? This means agreeing to plans we didn't create. It means spending time with others when they are feeling down and depressed. It means being available and reliable even when you don't like it. It means choosing not to be overly critical when someone is weak. It means choosing not to step on other people's boundaries. It means always being supportive and never being competitive. And lastly, it means never playing the victim, but striving together as friends as we fight for victory. So, sisters, what kind of a friend are you? This will determine what kind of friendship you have. Will your relationship be godly or godless? Thank you and have a great night.